Vinde alma caridosa, quem tem fome alimentar, dá-lhe um pão e uma rosa.
Pai nosso, que estais no céu, santificado seja o vosso nome. Venha a nós o vosso reino, seja feita a vossa vontade, assim na terra como no céu, assim na terra como no céu. O pão nosso de cada dia dai-nos hoje, ó Senhor. Perdoai as nossas dívidas, assim como perdoamos aos nossos devedores. Não deixeis cair em tentação, mas livrai-nos de todo o mal. Não deixeis cair em tentação, mas livrai-nos de todo o mal.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Saturdays when we have always a guest speaker that is going to be giving us a talk. As always, we would like to invite you all to join us in a prayer so that we can address our gratitude to all those moments that we have been spending together and that we have been learning. So we elevate our thoughts and our hearts, uniting ourselves to show our gratitude to our Heavenly Creator for all the blessings that we have been receiving, all the assistance, and is asking, especially today, for assistance for our guest speaker, Julio, that he may be able to help us in learning, in understanding even more about Spiritism and its concepts. We pray that the good spirits may be with us in each and every home that is now following us, and we ask permission to start our special talk. So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are very blessed. We feel very happy to have our dear friend Julio Carvalho with us, that is going to give us this talk about prejudice, racism, and spiritism. But first, let me introduce you to you, Julio. Julio Carvalho is the founder and co-director of the Spiritist Center Divine Light in Newark, New Jersey. He's a member of the Tri-State Spiritist Federation, where he works actively in the Department of Public Speaking. Mr. Carvalho participates in national and international congresses representing the United States and the Tri-State Spiritist Federation. Professionally, he is a licensed clinical social worker with 20-year experience in public speaking in the field of mental health, group administration, and emotional well-being. He works as a psychotherapist for Compassionate Care Hospice. Academically, he has a bachelor in biology and a master's degree in social work at Kean University. Julio, welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us. We are really hoping, for quite a while to hear you giving this talk to us. So now it's with you.
Thank you, our friend Jusada, for the kind introduction. Thank you, the United States Spiritist Federation for this invitation. And we start by wishing everyone peace in our hearts and enlightenment in our minds. This concept of judging someone before we actually take our time to know them undoubtedly causes much harm in our society. But before we continue, we must define the words that we'll be using primarily to defend our argument, which is, to begin, the word prejudice. What does the word prejudice stand for? I know we have an urban definition of prejudice that most people are aware of, but the word prejudice actually means to make a prejudgment. And to fully understand the concept of prejudice or making a prejudgment, let's first discuss what judgment is. Judgment is a broad term that can mean many different things depending on the setting you find yourself in. We have, for example, in a court setting, the judge. And the judge, to pass judgment onto someone, he will take his time to analyze both the pros and cons against the individual that is before him. So the prosecutor will present his case against the defender, and the public defender or lawyer will present his case in favor of the defender. And that takes time. At times, regular people are taken from the public. Most individuals do not like to participate on this. It's called jury duty, in which the public has the power to pass judgment, how they feel about the individual's case. But the key aspect of this situation is the fact that it takes time to pass judgment, because they're actually understanding, comprehending, analyzing all the different situations that took place before the actual crime, or especially how the crime itself was carried out, in order to either say that this individual is innocent or is actually guilty. That is judgment. It's our ability to discern, to choose right from wrong, to actually learn and make a decision, a wise decision upon our knowledge. So to judge, it's actually a natural process that stems from our learning. When you learn, when you study human behavior, it is impossible not for you to make a discernment, to distinguish right from wrong. Certain individuals, they say that we can't judge people. That is true, but the definition of judgment here has to be explained in order for us to fully understand what do we mean by this. Because at times, one can be naive and actually believe that we must see goodness everywhere. And that will be unhealthy as seeing evil everywhere. We have to make a discernment to choose right from wrong. We have to analyze. But when we study human behavior, and if you are engaged in the realm of self-transformation, the minute that you see someone who is actually, through their acts, showing their defects, their imperfections, it's impossible for you not to actually see what's going wrong, not to actually observe the wrongdoing of this individual. So to judge in this context, it's impossible. One will pass judgment. In other words, one will distinguish right from wrong. And if something is right, it will be right. If something is wrong, will be wrong based upon the actions that we are observing at that moment by studying the circumstances. To actually not to judge, it's very different. Not to judge is to strongly believe that you will never do what the other person is doing. It's to have the certainty that you will never engage in what the person is actually engaged in. And that we don't know. Because if we place ourselves in the person's shoes, with their experience, with their upbringing, with their social conditioning, chances are we'll probably do the same thing that they did. That would be not to judge, to believe that we never do something like that. And what is the consequence of this way of thinking? Compassion. You would actually understand what took place, what were the psychological forces that compel this individual to act in this manner. Now, compassion and understanding of behavior does not justify the behavior. It simply explains, and with explanation, with understanding, we're able here to provide some sort of help, not to condemn and actually punish the individual. So to have judgment, it's a natural consequence of human behavior knowledge. The knowledge that you gain from understanding people's behavior will give you judgment, will give you the ability to make a discernment. And that's what a judge is doing. So now that we clarify the word judgment, let's go back to prejudgment. Prejudgment or prejudice is to have an idea, is to have certainty of something without any prior knowledge. You look at something, you look at a certain individual, and then you tell yourself that you know everything there is to know about this person or about this thing without any prior knowledge, without giving the necessary time to actually know the circumstances that led this individual to act this way, to be who he is or who she is. That will be prejudice. And prejudice can be of all aspects, but today we are concentrating only in prejudice that refers to race, because there is misogyny or sexism when a man believes, or the system believes, that male are actually smarter than females, and this have manifested throughout academia for centuries. Then there is social prejudice when people believe that just because you're poor, either you are lazy, and believe it or not, it's way harder to be poor in a rich country than being poor in a poor country. How is that possible? Well, that's because if you are poor in a poor country, by definition, your social condition stems from the fact that you have a bad government, or your country doesn't have natural resources that can make it rich. So you are poor because of the system. But if you are poor in a rich country, it means this is your fault. It's your responsibility why you're this way. And that will be prejudice of social class. There are prejudice of disabilities. When we see someone with a physical disability, one might have this prejudgment, this idea without any prior knowledge, that this person might not perform their job equal as someone who has no disability. There is prejudice of ethnicity, when one believes that because we belong to a certain ethnical ground, we are better than the other ethnical background. When we believe because we belong to a certain group of individuals, one has to be bad. Back in the 1990s, there were so many push in order to change how movies perpetrated, for example, Puerto Ricans. I'm sure most of you have watched the movie Ghost, and in that movie, there is a Puerto Rican, if I'm not mistaken, his name is Jose Lopez, and he's the one who actually killed Patrick Swayze in the movie. And there were a lot of people who were disturbed by this. How come they had a Puerto Rican guy being the bad individual? Not knowing, I'm not excusing the behavior, but just analyzing, not knowing that the person who actually hired the Puerto Rican guy was a Caucasian guy. But, when we have these scenes and these movies and these images, they are constantly conveyed to us. We actually associate that idea with real life, and that could be extremely wrong, that association. There are even a prejudice of people who are overweight that they can be lazy. Prejudice for sexual orientation. That in itself would take a whole seminar for us to delve into. But today we're concentrating only in prejudice in regards to racism. This, unfortunately, it's a very sad situation for many reasons. And at times, for those who see the protests out there, they do not understand the rage, the madness. And what I'm about to explain does not mean that I agree with all the violence and the looting that happens when people are trying to protest. Because to protest, it's actually a constitutional right. Let me break that down just a minute. What is a constitutional right? We live in a society. It's a group of individuals, and we need rules to regulate our behavior. If we did not have rules to regulate our behavior, each individual would do as they please. Can you imagine the state of chaos this will render us to? So the Constitution, it's a document that establishes our rights and our duties. We have a duty to pay tax. There is no way to run away from that duty. But we also have rights. And what people don't understand is that government officials, they are not our leaders. And why not? Well, that's because we are the ones who are paying their salary. Through your income tax, all the products that you buy, anything that you spend your money into, you're always paying taxes. And the taxes is the portion that you're paying, your own contribution in order to run the government, because government does not have money of its own. It's your money. So when something is not according to your wishes, if you see something that is unjust, it's your constitutional right to protest. In other words, to demand change for a more just society. So protest is something very healthy. What is unhealthy, it's actually the looting and the breaking of things and damaging people's property that would not render any beneficial result for anyone. And we are seeing, for instances, breaking of statues, and some statues that actually represent those who were the oppressors of the past. But some people are breaking statues that have nothing to do with oppressors of the past. I was amazed to see that they actually broke the statue of Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill. I think people, either they don't know history or they don't even watch movies, because it's so clear that if it wasn't for Winston Churchill, Hitler had dominated the entire Europe, and the goal was to dominate the entire world. We owe to Winston Churchill the fact that he was able to confront Hitler with all his mighty force for 5 years in order to actually liberate the world from the hands of this madman. So the right to protest is a constitutional right. But breaking and looting, that is very unhealthy, sends a very wrong message. And there are those who are protesting that get very upset to the fact that there are looters and people who are taking advantage of the crowd just to carry a demeanored agenda. But if you watch the protest, for some who are not acquainted with U.S. history, one might be surprised of why people are so mad. And if you know just a little about what took place, the African American community have plenty of reason to be extremely mad. Not just the fact of the current events that took place, of that police officer who brutally murdered Floyd, but the historic events that actually is repeated in acts like that. And there are many consequences of what took place back in the past that it still has effects on today's society. I'll give you a small example. When the coronavirus broke out and people unfortunately started to die from this, those who studied demographics, quickly found out that the African community, together with other minorities, were dying in a disproportionate rate than the Caucasians. And the scientists try to figure out why, and because to die from coronavirus, one must have a comorbidity. It's a given. They must have some sort of a physical impairment, such as hypertension or diabetes, any kind of immunodeficiency disease. These are conditions that are created by our diet, the things that we eat. And because African Americans have a very special diet that relates to their culture, such as soul food, which constitutes food that are cooked with much oil and grease. These scientists, some of them concluded that it had to do with that aspect of their lives. Remember, our body is a physical machine, and the machine indeed needs care. Otherwise, if we constantly break it down by the chemicals that we put in, it's actually poison, the perpetual poisoning from what we eat. The body would definitely get sick. So some of the scientists were associating the fact that African Americans eat this kind of food, therefore they have more hypertension, more diabetes, and as a result, they were dying from COVID-19. But other scientists who studied different aspects, not only the physical aspect, but the social conditionings, blamed on slavery for some of the COVID-19 deaths. Now, one might think, what something that took so long ago has to do with people dying today. Well, I'll explain it to you. People don't realize that Irish people, when they arrive in the US, they arrive to make a fortune. People from all over Europe, when they arrive in the US, some of them due to religious persecution, others just because they want to better their social conditions, when they arrived in the US, they came here to make a fortune. And as a result, someone's great-great-great-father arrived here and made a fortune and passed that money on to the great-great-father of someone that is living today. Someone living today's great father arrived here and actually made more money. And that money from the great grandfather was passed on to the grandfather and to the father. And someone who is actually living today inherited all this money that was passed on from generation to generation. As a result, this individual was able to actually go to college, have a nice desk job. And when the governor came in and said, let's all stay at home, we need a quarantine, because he had a nice job due to his social conditions, he was actually able to just sit at home and protect himself from the COVID-19 contamination. But for someone whose great-grandfather came here not to make a fortune, but to be a slave, and that person did not make any money, so therefore was not able to pass his money on to the next generation. And that person was not able to pass any money on to the next generation. So as an African American, my great-grandfather was not able to pass any money to my grandfather, and my grandfather was not able to pass any money to my father. And as a result, the social conditions that I was born into did not provide the same opportunities as other social classes. And as a result, I had to limit myself to a job in which I had to expose myself to COVID-19. So I became a bus driver. So now when the governor tells, everybody, you must quarantine, as a bus driver, I cannot do that. I have to go out there and actually earn my living. And as a result of that, I had to expose myself to COVID-19. And the consequence was I died of COVID-19. So as you can see, what happened in the past still has its ripple effects on today's society. We often talk about what Hitler did to the Jews from 1939 to 1945, and it was a horrific thing. And it happened for 5 years. Horrific. But slavery here in the US was for 250 years. 250 years. Not only this, but there were so many things, even after the abolishment of slavery, that unfortunately reinforced this idea that there is a superior race. Back in the 1960s, something horrific took place that reinforces the idea that we're never, if you are an African American, you're never liberated from the oppressor. And this was the Tuskegee experiment, in which the US government, through its Ministry of Health, actually injected syphilis into African Americans to study the development of the disease. What a horrible thing to do. And 40 years later, President Clinton had to actually say a public apology to all African Americans of this country. A horrible thing. So, if you look at the other side and you don't understand the behavior, there are plenty of reasons for them to be mad, because indeed there is racism. The fact that I am prejudging someone, I think I know the person just by looking at the color of their skin. And this racial concept, it's actually a social construct. Indeed, it's a social construct. Reason being is because, science has demonstrated a long time ago that we all stem from the same place. We all have the same family. There's a branch of science called anthropology. Anthropology is the science that studies human bones. Anthropo means man, ology means science, the study of man. And then there is paleoanthropology. This is the science that actually study the bones of hominids. And then you have archaeology, which is the science that study objects that belongs to these individuals that lived a long, long time ago. And I'm referring here to 150,000 to 300,000 years ago. And some of the recent discoveries took place in a cave in South Africa called the Rising Star. And once again, a confirmation here that all people from the earth came from Africa. Back in the 1920s and 30s, this was so hard to accept because that was racism in science. You know, science is a collective enterprise that unfortunately at times, science itself, knowledge, it's not objectively accepted, and there are subjective concepts that are influencing the science itself. And this took place in the field of anthropology, when the scientists could not at all accept the fact that human race did not have other origin except in Europe. But then the bones, skulls start coming in to anthropologists in Europe. And those bones dated way back than the bones they found in Europe. And so with facts, there are no arguments. And anthropologists and science had to finally accept the fact that we all came from Africa. And in this particular discovery that took place in this African cave, the Rising Star, after the scientists concluded their study, they went on to make a public announcement of their findings. And they actually chose the Church of Desmond Tutu to make the announcement. And who is Desmond Tutu? Desmond Tutu is a Catholic figure that hardly fought apartheid with Nelson Mandela, through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So it was a beautiful scene to watch. All these scientists at Desmond Tutu Church, and there they were to once again confirm the knowledge that all humans came from Africa. These were hominids. These were similar to humans, and they dated way back than other bones that were found. It's another linkage in the evolution of the human body. And after Desmond Tutu heard the scientific discovery, he then wisely commented on the realm that is his specialty, religion. And he said, in Genesis, we learn about Adam and Eve, and people should not take this information literally. Adam and Eve are a symbol that all human beings came from the same family. So here we have, through anthropology, science confirming that all humans came from Africa. We all have the same family. And that's what Genesis says. Adam and Eve, they are a symbol to let us know, to confirm that we all stem from the same family. And that being the fact, why is it that we're still separating ourselves so much? Why is it that we separate ourselves thinking that because our skin color is different than other people, we somehow are superior to them? When in reality, we all came from them. And for those who are not versed in science, they might ask, so if we all came from the same family, how come we're so different in appearance? Well, that's because our body has a great ability to adapt to different environments. So when by traveling to a different environment, your body has to adapt to that environment. For example, let's say you suddenly move out to Canada or to the North Pole. Once you get there, it is so bitterly cold that you feel that your bones are going to break. But after a while, what happens is that you have an ability to adapt to the cold. And you won't feel the cold as you felt when you initially arrived at the North Pole. It's your ability to adapt. Now, when you have thousands of years to adapt, you have real physical changes. They are easily observable. So when we lived in Africa, so I'm going to use my phone here as reference, that being the planet. So most people who lived in Africa, it's most of Africa, it's like in the equator of the planet where you receive so much sunlight. And what happened as human beings, as hominids, we actually started to travel and explore different regions of the planet. We slowly but constantly left the equator of the planet and we went to towards the north of the planet. And as a result, we were receiving less sunlight. And because we were receiving less sunlight, we had to adapt our skin to allow the skin to absorb more sunlight, to actually let more sunlight go through. And the quantity of melanin in our skin start to decrease gradually. I know you have seen on TV albino. Albino are individuals who have no melanin on their skin. So the quantity of melanin has a direct impact on how much sunlight you can receive. And then you might ask, what's the point of receiving sunlight? It's because sunlight is vital for us to produce vitamin D, which it's essential for physiological functions. So in order for our body to adapt to continue producing vitamin D, it had to change the color of the skin. So it adapted over the thousands of years. That's the reason why we have different skin color. But with today, the capacity of studying DNA, all of our DNAs show our origin in Africa. Once again, this is science. And unfortunately, this idea, this factor, this scientific fact, it's not taught as much as it should, because I truly believe that might give people a different reason to actually look at other people. They are different from them with different eyes, the eyes of brotherhood, of fraternity, because we are indeed all the same family. That's what the science shows. But the difficulties that stem from looking at people with these eyes, with different eyes, with the eyes of brotherhood and fraternity, is because at times we do see things that confirm our biased notion about other people's behavior. It actually confirms that certain races could be inferior than others. And this is a poor perception or a very poor understanding of social conditions. And I worked at a county jail for 12 years. During those 12 years, I provided psychotherapy to more than 23,000 inmates. I had to give statistics, and I knew these numbers by memory because I had to see this amount of people on a daily basis. I provided psychotherapy to at least 10 people. And indeed, when you study jail statistics, what you'll notice is that the African-American community is way higher than any other community inside the jail system. But are they there because they're Black? Are they there because of their race? Have they committed those crimes simply because their color of their skin is Black? Absolutely not. What you have there is a social condition in which anyone who were placed in those social conditions might do exactly the same thing that those people did. I'm not saying that if you are poor, immediately you are a criminal. But being poor definitely contributes for you not to have the same opportunities to get out of that vicious cycle. If you are a little baby and around you, what you have are words of encouragement to ill behavior. If you're a little baby and you're not even aware of yourself and who you are, visiting your uncle in jail, and you're visiting your father in jail, you're visiting your grandfather in jail, most likely this criminal language, this nomenclature of troubles and problems will become your norm. And once you grow up, it will be just norm for you to follow those footsteps. And this also stems from the lack of opportunities, because their ancestors were brought here not to make a fortune, but rather to be taken advantage of. So these are social conditions. It has nothing to do with the color of their skin. Once again, anyone being placed in those conditions will probably do the same or even worse. Because when I stop to hear their story, with understanding that I was not justifying their behavior, but comprehending what led them to that condition, to me, it almost sounds like a miracle for them to become something else. Anyone placed in those conditions will probably do the same. And this is what I saw all the time with my own eyes. So to make it very clear, it's not because their skin is dark that they'll commit crimes. Social conditioning that influences people to a behavior in which is unacceptable. But what this topic of racism and prejudice has to do with Spiritism. Now, through the eyes of the Spiritist philosophy, we look at this from a very different angle. First of all, in Spiritism, we learn that we are not our bodies. We are a spirit who is temporarily housed in a biological machine. And we are not this machine, but the machine is so perfect that gives us the illusion that we are the machine when we're not. I always like to give this analogy so people fully grasp the concept that this is a machine. Back in the 1970s, when you drove a car, you really drove a car. Once you arrived at your destination, you probably had muscle aches just by turning that wheel and pressing all the pedals with no hydraulics of any kind. Now, we're in the year 2020. You have the electric cars. Some of these cars you step into, you speak to the car, and the car takes you to your destination. Now, there are already studies being carried on by neuroscientists who are placed in electrodes, and people with their mind can control an image on the screen. So we are very near to the actual experiment in which our thought would control the car. You think of your destination, the car takes you. This is very possible. I'm not talking about the far future. This is the near future. And once we arrive at that point, you think of your destination, the car takes you. It will be very hard to distinguish where the car ends and you begin, or where you end and the car begins, because you're so intricately connected with the machine that you believe that you are the machine. And this, what the body is. It's such a perfect machine that gives you the illusion that you are the machine, but you're not the machine. You are driving this vehicle. You are conducting this vehicle, but you're not this vehicle. And this vehicle serves you to give the spirit knowledge of the mind, knowledge of the heart. Most people ask themselves, I know life has a purpose, but I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know what my mission is. So here we go. I'm giving you flat out what your mission is. Your mission is to develop yourself intellectually, to become smarter, and to develop your moral virtues, to be more kind, to be more loving. That's your mission. And in order to fulfill that mission, we as a spirit, we need to go through different experiences, different cultures, different races. and even different sexual pluralities, male, female. So in the spiritual world, once you are preparing the future lesson, you will choose the lesson that is most according to your spiritual needs of evolution. So you reincarnate into the race, or you reincarnate into the sex that will offer you the lessons that you need to amass in order to evolve. So from the Spiritist philosophy perspective, racism has absolutely no grounds of being, because I could belong to a particular race today, and in my future life, in my future physical existence, I'll belong to a different race. And by the way, once again, race does not exist. That is a social construct. But different ethnic groups, they do exist. And depending on my spiritual needs, I will be born in a different ethnic group according to my spiritual needs. And depending on what I do when I am in a specific ethnic group, that would have consequences for my future physical existence. Take, for example, the story of the book in Renunciation. This is a book written by Emmanuel, the Spirit, through the hands of the medium Francisco Candido Xavier. It's a beautiful book called Renunciation. And in this book, after you read it, you have so much resilience, because the protagonist, it's a strong female who undergoes all different kinds of sacrifices. And she is doing that in order to teach us how to overcome our own challenges. Just let me open a parenthesis here a little. When we were told to be quarantined, there were some friends of mine who came to me and said, I'm going to watch now the whole Netflix series that I was just craving to watch, and now I have the time. Or I'm going to watch all the YouTube videos, that when I was a child. What they're looking for, it's entertainment. And I understand the search for entertainment. But entertainment will rarely provide us with the psychological tools that we need to overcome our challenges. And these formidable books, not only they entertain you, because, when you start reading chapter 1, you want to get through the book. It's just wonderful. Not only entertains you, but most importantly, it gives you the psychological tools for you to overcome all your troubles. After you read a book like this, your problems would not disappear, but will become this little, because you see someone who have gigantic problems, and you see their coping skills, and you see what they have done to overcome them, and suddenly you get the idea that you're also capable of, because you have the same origin. Your origin is God. We all came from the same source. And moral virtues and intellect ability are just like muscles. The more you exercise them, the stronger they get. So you see problems from a whole different angle. These are not disturbances to perturb you. Problems are opportunities for you to develop your muscle virtues, or the muscle of your virtues. That's what problems are. It gives you resilience. What is resilience? The ability to bend, to be crushed down, and to come back to the same shape. So during this quarantine time, read spirits books. They are wonderful to entertain you, and at the same time, to empower you with the psychological tools you need to overcome all the problems. So in this book, Renunciation, and I'm not telling the whole story, just a very small part of, there was this guy, his name was Antero. And Antero was in love with Madeline, but Madeline, she was a widower, and she was in love with her husband, and her heart was given to her husband, and her husband passed away, and she decided not to be with anyone else. And Antero tried and tried and tried, and she never gave in. And eventually he left, and he started to go out with certain friends, and these friends were involved in the slavery business. And in order to make quick money, he got himself into the business of sending slaves to America. In the book, it gives you so much historic content. And it even explains to you, why do we call New Jersey, or New England and New York and Newark? And it tells the stories of these individuals who came from Europe. And indeed, they came from Jersey. They came from York. And they had so much longing for their homes that when they arrived in the U.S., they wanted to make here their new homes. So Jersey now became New Jersey. They wanted to bring their York with them from Europe. And here, when they arrived, they made it New York, to have a new life connected with their old style of being. And so he started in the business of sending slaves to the U.S., and obviously that was completely wrong. And because he grew so rich, there were some ambitious, greedy people who actually murdered him in order to have his part of the business. So once he found himself in the spiritual world, he was full of guilt, full of regret for the things he had done. And in order for him to develop his fraternity, the ability to see other people as his own, because that's all, we are all from the same family. Even the animals are from the same family. We are interconnected with nature. In his future reincarnation, he was forced to be born in the ethnicity that he actually harmed in his previous reincarnation. So he was born a son of a slave. Not only he was born as a son of a slave, but he was born with a birth defect on one of his legs. And at that time, if you're a slave and your son or your daughter had a birth defect, they were immediately killed after birth. But because his parents loved him so much, they actually gave him for adoption. And who adopted him? The same person that he loved in a previous existence, Madeline. And so now he grew up receiving the mistreatments of the other race that he actually belonged to, in order for him to learn not to ever do that again. And he died when he was 16 years old. There was an accident. It was either his fault. It was not the fault of the driver, but he died in the accident. And in the accident, he saw himself leaving his body. He's telling his sister, the main character of this book, Alcyone, and he tells his sister that he was actually seeing his body, his leg, no longer with the birth defect. So from that experience, he liberated himself from the guilt that caused the birth defect to begin with. My friends, we are all brothers and sisters in humanity. Racism has no place whatsoever. As long as we keep seeing ourselves through the lenses of superiority or with the inferiority complex, it will be very hard for us to move forward. We regard ourselves to be extremely smart just because we have our gadgets, just because we have this technological advancement. But 100 years from now, when we actually look ourselves back in time, we will see that our technological advancements of today is nothing compared with what we're going to have in 100 years from now. So we're not going to judge ourselves from the technological point of view. We're going to judge ourselves by the things we have done to one another. And this is why we have to move forward very fast. Because what we do with one another directly impacts our future, not only of this current, but the future reincarnation as well. So it is in the best of our interest to treat all as brothers and sisters, because that's who we truly are. One big family. Not the right race, not the red, not the black, not the yellow, but the human race. Thank you so much for your attention.
Hi, Julio. Thank you so much for bringing to us the subject. It's always a very sensitive subject, but I think you really set the basis for people to understand that for us in Spiritism, the idea and the understanding that we have, considering that we are incarnationists, we understand that we will be experiencing life in many forms, in many places, in many ethnicities, and therefore there should be no reason whatsoever for us to consider someone less just because, or more just because they pertain to this or that race, to this or that ethnicity, or this or that country. So thank you so much. We have a few questions here. Perhaps we could show it to you. How can we analyze people's actions and opinions, taking into consideration the times in which they lived according to Spiritism?
First of all, let me tell you guys that I have 2 smart dogs, and these dogs, they always know when I'm doing a lecture in the internet, because they purposely bark just to disturb me. So I apologize for all the barking in case you heard. What one has to keep in mind, it's always to see ourselves in the other person's shoes. What would you do if you had the person's experiences, social conditioning, upbringing, and actually the contingency that makes them choose a very negative path? Put yourself in their shoes. It's not to put yourself in their shoes with your mentality, with your experience, with your knowledge. That won't work, because you would say to yourself, I would never do something like that. But that's not how that works. We had to place ourselves in their shoes. And by doing this, you understand that it will be very hard not to make the same decision. And this leads to compassion. And what Spiritism brings to this concept is the fact that if we have arrived at this condition today, it's because we have passed the other stages. There is no miracle in spiritual evolution. Everything happens in very small baby steps. So if someone truly appears to you evil, there is a chance that we have actually gone through that path before, because we're not subjected to actually go through the experience of being evil, but we are indeed subject to go through the experience of ignorance. That's what we learn from the Spirit's book. And what is ignorance? Lack of knowledge. And when we have a lack of knowledge, there is a propensity for us to make mistakes. And once we make those mistakes, this is not necessarily a sin, but actually a negative experience in which we turn to a positive experience with time, by learning from our own mistakes.
Thank you, Julio. So we have another one here, another question. Let me see. Wait, first one to put it here. Oh, sorry. It was the same question. I thought it was a different one. So if anyone has any question, now is the time for you to ask. And Julio, do you think that it's somehow we, with Spiritism and with the understanding that we have, we could if it broader, explained to people, we could perhaps reduce all this prejudice that we have?
I think prejudice would take a long time to be reduced, because prejudice, it's the way we see the other person. And as long as is in our mind, it can be a healthy thing to do. But when our prejudice actually turns to discrimination, there's a big difference here between prejudice and discrimination. And what is discrimination? Is when we act on our prejudice. So let's say I have prejudice of age. I believe that old people are unfit to work. And if I believe in this and this stays in my mind, it's not a social harm. But if I own Star and I would not hire someone who's old, that would be discrimination. And discrimination can be eliminated with laws. We have so many legislators in the past, and this is one of the main functions of Martin Luther King Jr., because there is no law that you can impose on people to care for one another, but there are laws that you can impose someone to hire a person that is of a different skin color than yours. When you enter into a job, it's the law states that you must have those discriminatory documents showing that there is no prejudice of sexual orientation, no prejudice of age, no prejudice of race, of religion, which is very important. So discrimination can be eliminated, I truly believe, in the near future if we want to. A prejudice, that might take a little longer. And reason being, it's because the main obstacle to our evolution is selfishness and pride. And what is selfishness? It's when I want everything for myself. What is pride? It's when I believe that I'm better than other individual. And since I already stated that there is no jumps in evolution, everything happens in baby steps, it will take time for us to actually conquer our pride. But we can definitely change the action, even if we feel prejudice. One might believe that in our hearts, one might believe that just because we are male, we are smarter than a female. But we already know, through knowledge, we know that's wrong. And then, even though I feel this in my heart, I would actually give a female the same opportunity that I give a male. For example, if I am a academic advisor, or if I am a president of a lab corporation, and here I have a male and a female applicant to be the laboratory manager, even though I could feel the prejudice in my heart, believing that a male will be more successful and efficient in doing that job, I will hire the female. That could be done. And in Spiritist terms, and in Christian terms, that's what Christ meant when he asked us to love our enemy. What is to love our enemy? Love here is not necessarily a feeling, because love, the feeling, takes time to gradually get to be loved, the feeling. It's the result of affinities, the result of time, it's the result of trustworthiness, and then that results in love. So how can I have that for someone that truly thinks different than I, or has done harm to me, or wishes me harm? Well, to do that, it's not love the feeling, but the action. I would treat that person with kindness. I would treat that person with love. And treatment, action itself, we can force ourselves to do it just because we're aware of. So in that regard, Spiritism can be a great source of human advancement if we truly understand that we all belong to the same family, and we have indeed reincarnated into the different sexual polarity and also into different races as well.
Okay, we have a few more questions here. Thank you, Julio, from Daniel Santos. In your opinion, how to tell someone that has no other view of life that we are brothers and sisters, come from the same origin?
You see, whenever I'm having a conversation with someone, I always try to assess through our regular conversation, their level of intellect or their level of spirituality. Because if I'm talking to someone who is prone to science, of course, I'm going to give them a scientific argument. For those of you who know Francisco Xavier, he used to say that we all have the eye of the coconut. What is the eye of the coconut? He used to say that he read all different kinds of material in order to, when he was having a conversation with someone, he would have the eye of the coconut. What is the eye of the coconut? If you have a real coconut in your hand, the coconut has a soft part that you can actually draw the liquid from. If you try to get to the coconut water from different parts of the coconut, you're not going to be successful. So this is the eye of the coconut. So people have eyes of their coconut. So, you keep yourself abreast of sports and science and all different kinds of subject. And when you actually talk to someone, you will find out what is the eye of the coconut. So obviously, if I'm speaking to someone who has a proclivity to science, I will give them scientific argument. This is a scientific fact. The things that I said in our lecture, this is not my personal opinion. This is anthropology. Through some people might ask, how in the world can you know these things by just looking at a bone? Well, this is not a scientific lecture, but rather a spiritist lecture, and I don't have the time to get into the science. But there is a decaying of the carbon-14. And by studying the decaying of the carbon-14, you will know the age of the object or the bone that you're actually studying from. And also the DNA that you can extract from these bones. So when you study humans today, humans' DNA, they all share the same genetic information. A part of the DNA, it's shared information that all came from Africa. This is a scientific fact. By looking at each other from the point of view of races, that is indeed a social construct. We have constructed that over time. So this is how I would do it, my friend Daniel. I will assess the person, prior knowledge to know their eye of the coconut. If it's someone spiritual, obviously, I would bring the fact that, there's only one God. And if there's only one God, this God had to create us all. If you think the other race was created by other God, what you're doing, you're undermining the own God that you believe in, because you are giving power to other gods to create. You're diminishing your concept of your own God. So it's only one God. And just let me open a parenthesis here. I'm always careful when we are giving these lectures, because I take into consideration we might have someone has never heard of the Spiritist philosophy before. And we Spiritists, we truly understand, we truly know that there is a supreme intelligence of the universe, but we have absolutely no idea what God is. We know is the supreme intelligence, we know is the creator of all things, but to us, God is not Jesus. God is not a human being. We do not anthropomorphize this supreme intelligence. We simply don't know what it is. We truly know that all effect must have a cause. The universe or the universes have a cause, and this cause is this supreme intelligence. Do we know what it is? No, we don't. We just know some of the qualities of this supreme intelligence, and one of them is the supremacy in creating all of us. And by creating all of us, that by definition makes us all brothers and sisters. In the prayer itself taught by Christ, we start the prayer by saying, "Our Father." Well, if the Father is our, that automatically makes us brothers and sisters of one another.
Okay, we have another question here. What attitude should we have towards those who think they are superior to us?
Compassion. And what is compassion? Compassion is the understanding of the other person's behavior. You are not in agreement. You're not applauding this behavior, but you are not against that person, because through the knowledge of the Spiritist philosophy, you know that this is just a infant in spirit who actually has this pretense to be better than other people. Their level of pride, it's more intense, and as a result, they suffer a lot, because when you have this level of pride, pride does not only manifest in that realm, it's manifested in different aspects of your life. Chances are these individuals have a very hard time forgiving other people for what they have done to them. And when you hate someone, you're always sick yourself. So they have plenty to lose, and have even more compassion, because chances are the race that they so despise, that they so hate, will be the future race into they will be born in. So they have to drink from their own poisoning uh, by reborning into the race they so hate. Um, have compassion on them. That's what I would tell you.
Okay, another one. While seeing especially the youth at jail system, what is your analysis for a more effective solution to start to decrease this inequality, disparity among African Americans?
Investment in more equal opportunity. Equal opportunity here, especially in the starting years in education. And this is not an easy problem to solve, because since the 1960s, there have been so many different social programs in order to help people to actually escalate on the ladder of social status. It's not an easy problem to solve, because it gets to a point in which if your social help is actually higher than the salary that one could acquire by a regular job, where is the stimulus to get a regular job if I could get this money for free? So it's not an easy question to answer. Some legislators have proposed to actually pay the mothers of poor people to make sure that their children could actually get through elementary school. And once their children get to elementary school, then they will pay a different amount of money to the mother to make sure they are concluded with high school. And once they are able to go to college, they will pay a different money to the mother to send that child to college. But what happens that their children now, after finishing college, when they have their own children, you will stop the vicious cycle. Their own children now will eventually go to college and so forth. So we'll propose equal opportunity here to all classes, especially, not to all classes, but especially to the classes that have been disfavored throughout history. Now, equal results of those opportunity, that's a different thing. Equal outcome, it's a different subject in itself, because equal outcome depends on the abilities and the intellect of those who have received equal opportunity in the beginning. Equal opportunity, it's a different thing from equal outcome.
Okay, another question. Why don't we see mentions to superior spirits who are Black in the Spiritist literature, meaning the books? Always the superior spirits are white with blue eyes.
I think that is actually a lack of your perception, Alessandra. There are plenty of books in which the individuals who are superior, they actually belong to all different kinds of races. It depends on which books you have read. The Spiritist literature, it's actually a voluminous literature. I think there is no other train of thought and no other branch of knowledge that has more books published than the Spiritist philosophy. So there are plenty of books out there that show people from different races being superior. And people who are here right now, for example, since we are talking about African Americans, one of the biggest proponent of the Spiritist philosophy is actually Raul Teixeira. Raul Teixeira, he's Afro-Brazilian, and he's loved and cherished by millions of people that know his work. Martin Luther King Jr., this is a highly evolved spirit, someone who came here to change our history, through nonviolence, to change the mind of people. You have Nelson Mandela, you have Mahatma Gandhi, and some of these individuals, when they were in the spiritual plane before reincarnating, they are part of those, if I might say, the government of the spiritual plane of that country. And they are reborn with that specific mission to bring progress to the people they temporarily belong to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julio. I think that was a great answer. We actually can see through literature and even through the communications that we receive, one of the great spirits that have been assisting us in this journey is Sojourn Truth, and her story is so inspiring. And there are many representatives, even the romances of Emmanuel. Most of the heroes, they belong to what we could, it is understood, it was understood at that time as being from, minorities as well. So if we took even the case of Paul and Stephen, they belong to a minority. They were from the Jewish race, for instance, and they were so much despised for other civilizations like the Egyptians and the Romans and all that. So, yeah, but I understand that I think we have to bring more to light that, as you so clearly mentioned in your talk, as spirits, we are all the same, and there is nothing that can reduce the light, the knowledge, the wisdom of a spirit, because it's only measured by its spiritual acquisitions, their virtues. So before we end our conversation today, we would like to see if you have any final remarks, and also if you would be willing to do the final prayer to us.
I want to thank you, Jasara, for being so kind in having this conversation with everyone. I want to thank the United States Spiritist Federation for the opportunity. And I want to thank God for giving us all the opportunity to care for one another, to see in one another brothers and sisters. Help us, all of us, supreme intelligence of the universe, to overcome our superiority complex, our inferiority complex. Help us to understand that our evolution, that our growth is directly proportional to the effort that we place to better ourselves. Help us to become more kind, more loving towards all. Give us the wisdom to not judge anyone, but to give ourselves time to know the other person before we make a prejudgment of them. Because at the real core, we all have the same longing, the longing to love, to be loved, to grow, to mature, to become superior spirits. So be it.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much. Next week, we will have again our dear friend Alvaro Mordecai that will be talking to us about the 10 plagues of the Egypt. So, Yeah, I think it's the 10 plagues. And we will be continue with the series of talks every Saturday. So stay tuned with us and join us to learn even more with our guest speakers. Thank you so much. May you have all a peaceful day, and I'll see you next week.